I was handling business, not babysitting ambulances. That's what she said to me, right here in this courtroom, not through her lawyer, not in a whisper to the gallery, directly to my face from the witness stand with her chin lifted like she was explaining why the help had set the table wrong. Victoria Harrington, 42 years old, wife of a tech sector billionaire who'd made his fortune in data infrastructure. She wore a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than most people make in a month, and her hair was pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt. She hadn't blinked in 30 seconds. I'd been watching. The courtroom was dead silent. Her attorney, a man named Philip Gass, silver-haired, $3,000 suit, the kind of lawyer who shows up in a town car, had his hand frozen halfway to his briefcase. He hadn't expected that answer either. I leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Harrington," I said, "you're under oath. I'm going to ask you again, and I want you to think carefully before you respond. On the afternoon of March 14th, when you were told that an ambulance was directly behind your vehicle with lights and sirens active, what did you do?" She didn't hesitate. I continued driving. "I had a meeting," someone in the gallery gasped. I didn't look. I kept my eyes on her. "You continued driving," I repeated. "Yes, Your Honor. For how long? I don't recall exactly." "Several minutes." "Several minutes." "Yes." I sat back. Let the silence do the work. The jury box was to my left, 12 people, 7 women, 5 men, ages ranging from 23 to 68, a retail manager, a retired school teacher, an accountant, a construction foreman, a nurse, people who worked for a living, people who'd sat in traffic and pulled over for ambulances without thinking twice about it. They were all staring at her. Juror number 5, the nurse, a woman in her mid-40s with reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, had her arms crossed. Her jaw was tight. I'd seen that look before. It's the look someone gets when they're trying very hard not to speak out of turn. Juror number 9, the construction foreman, was shaking his head, just slightly, just enough that I noticed. This case had landed on my docket 3 months earlier, and from the first motion hearing, I knew it was going to be a problem. Not because the law was complicated, it wasn't, but because the defendant had no concept that the law applied to her. The plaintiff was a woman named Elena Voss, 28 years old, paralegal at a mid-sized firm downtown, single mother. She'd been riding in the back of that ambulance with her 6-year-old daughter who'd gone into anaphylactic shock after a bee sting at a park. The paramedics had administered epinephrine, but the child was still struggling to breathe. They needed to get to County General. Fast. Victoria Harrington had been driving her Range Rover southbound on Laurel Canyon Boulevard. It was a Tuesday afternoon just after 3. The kind of day where the light hits the hills just right and you forget, for a second, that you're in the middle of a city with 4 million people. The ambulance came up behind her, full lights, full sirens. The kind of sound that cuts through everything. Your music, your thoughts, your conversation. You don't ignore it. You can't. Traffic around her pulled to the side. A Toyota Camry. A delivery truck. A motorcycle. Everyone moved. She didn't. For 2.5 miles she stayed in the left lane. Speed limit was 45. She was doing 42. The ambulance couldn't pass. There was oncoming traffic on a narrow road with no shoulder. The hills rose up on one side, drop-offs on the other. The paramedic driving the ambulance laid on the air horn. It's a sound designed to be impossible to ignore. It rattles your chest. It makes your teeth hurt. She didn't move. He radioed dispatch. Dispatch called the police. A motorcycle unit caught up to them and pulled alongside her vehicle, gesturing for her to pull over. The officer, a veteran named Ramirez who'd been on the force for 16 years, waved his arm, pointed to the side of the road, made it as clear as humanly possible. She glanced at him. I know she did, because it's on video. She turned her head, looked directly at him through her window and then looked forward again, and kept driving. When she finally stopped, it was because she'd reached her destination, a boutique wellness spa in Studio City called Serenity Now. The kind of place that offers jade rollers and sound baths and costs $200 for a 30-minute session. She put the car in park, grabbed her purse and stepped out. The ambulance went around her and sped off. She walked into the spa, checked in at the front desk, and went to her appointment. The little girl survived. Barely. She'd been without adequate oxygen for almost 8 minutes longer than necessary. The doctor said if the delay had been any greater, they'd be having a different conversation. As it was, Sophia, Alina's daughter, spent 4 days in the ICU. She had seizures. She had brain swelling. She had to relearn how to use her left hand because the oxygen deprivation had caused temporary motor impairment. She was 6 years old. Alina Voss filed a civil suit 2 months later. Reckless endangerment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, interference with emergency services. She wasn't asking for millions. She was asking for medical bills to be covered, for an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and for Victoria Harrington to face some kind of consequence. Gass tried to get it dismissed twice. The first time, he argued that there was no proof his client had knowingly obstructed the ambulance. I denied it. The dashcam footage from Officer Ramirez made that argument absurd. The second time, he argued that the charges were punitive and that his client had no intent to harm. I denied that one too. Intent doesn't matter when the harm is foreseeable, and any reasonable person knows that blocking an ambulance causes harm. So we went to trial. Day one was jury selection. Gass used half his strikes trying to eliminate anyone who worked in healthcare or emergency services. He got some of them, not all. Day two was opening statements. The prosecutor, a woman named Rachel Daniels, kept it simple. She told the jury what happened. She showed them a map of the route. She explained how long 2.5 miles takes when you're going 42 miles per hour and someone is dying in the vehicle behind you. Gass's opening statement lasted twice as long. He talked about the pressures of modern life. He talked about how easy it is to miss things when you're focused on the road. He talked about his client's spotless driving record, her charitable work, her contributions to the community. He didn't talk about Sophia. Day three was witness testimony. The first witness was the paramedic who'd been driving the ambulance. His name was Marcus Chen, 31 years old, 8 years on the job. He walked into the courtroom in his uniform, and I could see some of the jurors sit up straighter. There's something about a uniform that commands respect, even in a room where everyone's supposed to be equal. Daniels led him through the events of that day, where he was when the call came in, what the dispatcher told him, what he saw when he arrived at the park. Sophia Voss was unresponsive when we got there, Chen said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the weight in it. Her mother was holding her. The girl's lips were blue. Her airway was swelling shut. We administered epinephrine immediately, 0.3 milligrams, intramuscular injection. She responded, but not enough. We needed to get her to the hospital. What happened next? Daniels asked. We loaded her into the ambulance. Her mother rode with us. I got behind the wheel, activated lights and sirens, and started driving. The hospital was approximately 6 miles away. Under normal conditions with clear traffic, that's about an 8-minute drive with lights and sirens. We were aiming for 6, and did you make it in 6 minutes? No. Why not? Chen's jaw tightened. Because a white Range Rover wouldn't move. Gass stood up. Objection, speculation. The witness can't know the driver's intent. I looked at Gass. He's testifying to what he observed, counselor. Overruled. Continue, Mr. Chen. Chen nodded. We came up behind the vehicle on Laurel Canyon. Full lights, full sirens. Every other car on the road pulled over. This one didn't. I laid on the horn. Nothing. I got on the radio and requested police assistance. Officer Ramirez responded and pulled up alongside the vehicle to signal the driver. Still nothing. We followed that Range Rover for 2.4 miles at an average speed of 42 miles per hour. How did that affect your patient? Chen looked down at his hands. Sophia started seizing in the back. My partner was trying to keep her airway open, trying to administer a second dose of epinephrine, but she was coding. We were losing her. The courtroom was silent. You could hear the ventilation system. You could hear someone shifting in their seat in the back row. What does coding mean, Mr. Chen? Daniels asked. It means her heart stopped. Someone in the gallery made a sound. A small choked noise. I glanced over. It was Elena Voss. She had her hand over her mouth. Daniels let the silence sit for a moment. Then she said, "What happened when the Range Rover finally stopped? We went around it, got Sophia to the ER. The trauma team was waiting. They intubated her, got her heart started again, stabilized her. But those extra 8 minutes," he trailed off. "What about those 8 minutes, Mr. Chen? Every second matters when a kid can't breathe. Every second. Those 8 minutes could have been the difference between a full recovery and permanent brain damage. We got lucky. Sophia got lucky, but it didn't have to be that close." Daniels thanked him and sat down. Gass stood up for cross-examination. He buttoned his jacket, walked to the center of the room and gave Chen a sympathetic look. "Mr. Chen, I can't imagine how stressful that situation must have been for you." Chen didn't respond, just waited. "You mentioned that you were following my client's vehicle for approximately 2.5 miles. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And during that time, were there other vehicles on the road?" "Yes." "Was there oncoming traffic?" "Yes." "So it's possible that my client was unable to safely pull over due to road conditions, correct?" Chen's expression didn't change. "No," Gass blinked. No, there were multiple opportunities to pull over. The shoulder widened at least 3 times. Other vehicles managed to move. There was no reason she couldn't." Gass tried a different angle. "Mr. Chen, you've been a paramedic for 8 years. How many times would you say you've driven with lights and sirens active?" "Thousands." "And in those thousands of instances, have you ever encountered a driver who didn't immediately pull over?" "Yes." "How often?" "Rarely. But it happens. And when it does happen, what's usually the reason?" Chen paused, thought about it. "Usually they're distracted, on their phone, talking to someone, not paying attention. So it's not uncommon for drivers to miss an ambulance behind them. It's uncommon. But it happens." "Thank you, Mr. Chen." Gass sat down. He looked satisfied, like he'd made his point, but I saw the jury. They weren't buying it, because Chen had said it himself. Usually people are distracted. Usually there's a reason. Victoria Harrington wasn't distracted. She was focused. She saw the ambulance. She saw the officer. She made a choice. The next witness was Officer Ramirez, 51 years old, 16 years on the force. He had the kind of presence that fills a room, not because he was loud but because he was calm, steady. Daniels asked him to describe what he observed that day. "I was on patrol when I got the call from dispatch. Ambulance requesting assistance with a vehicle that wouldn't yield. I responded immediately, caught up to them on Laurel Canyon. I could see the ambulance with full lights and sirens, and I could see a white Range Rover directly in front of it, left lane, not moving. What did you do?" "I pulled up alongside the Range Rover. I made eye contact with the driver. I waved my arm, pointed to the side of the road, indicated that she needed to pull over. She looked directly at me, then looked forward again and continued driving." "She saw you?" "Yes, ma'am. No question. And she didn't pull over. Not until she reached her destination." "How far was that?" "Approximately 3/4 of a mile from where I first made contact." Daniels pulled up the dashcam footage on the screen. The jury turned to watch. "So did I. You could see everything. The ambulance, lights strobing red and white. The Range Rover, sleek and clean, centered in the left lane. Officer Ramirez pulling up on his motorcycle, waving his arm. And you could see her face through the window, clear as day. She turned her head, looked right at him. Her expression didn't change. No panic, no confusion, just a glance like she was checking a street sign. Then she looked forward and kept driving. The timestamp in the corner ticked forward. 10 seconds, 20, 30, 45. Then her turn signal came on and she pulled into the Serenity Now parking lot. The video ended. Daniels turned off the screen and walked back to her table. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Gass stood up for cross-examination. "Officer Ramirez, is it possible that my client didn't hear your verbal commands due to road noise?" Ramirez looked at him. "I didn't give verbal commands. She was inside a vehicle. I used hand signals." "Is it possible she didn't understand your hand signals?" "I pointed to the side of the road. It's a universal gesture. Even a child would understand it. But you can't know for certain what she was thinking, can you? No, sir, but I know what she did. And what she did was ignore a police officer and an ambulance in distress. Gast tried to push further, but Ramirez didn't budge. After a few more questions that went nowhere, Gast sat down. The third witness was Dr. Alan Brenner, a pediatric trauma physician at County General. He was in his early 60s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of calm demeanor that comes from 30 years of handling emergencies. Daniels asked him to explain what happens to a child's body during anaphylactic shock. The body's immune system overreacts to an allergen, in this case, bee venom. It releases chemicals that cause the airways to swell and constrict. Blood pressure drops. The heart struggles to pump. Without intervention, the patient can go into cardiac arrest within minutes. What kind of intervention is needed? Epinephrine, administered as quickly as possible. It opens the airways, stabilizes blood pressure, buys time. But it's not a cure. The patient needs to get to a hospital for monitoring, additional medication, and airway management if needed. What happens if there's a delay in getting to the hospital? Dr. Brenner took off his glasses and cleaned them. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant, like he was giving himself a moment to choose his words carefully. Every minute without adequate oxygen increases the risk of brain damage, organ failure, and death. Children are especially vulnerable because their systems are smaller, their reserves are limited. An 8-minute delay in a case like this, he trailed off. It's significant. Can you describe Sophia Voss's condition when she arrived at the hospital? She was in cardiac arrest. We performed CPR, intubated her, administered additional epinephrine and antihistamines. We got her heart started again, but she had prolonged hypoxia, lack of oxygen to the brain. She seized multiple times. We induced a medical coma to reduce brain swelling. It was touch and go for the first 72 hours. What was the prognosis? Initially, we weren't sure if she'd wake up. And if she did wake up, we weren't sure what kind of cognitive or motor function she'd have. Brain injuries from oxygen deprivation are unpredictable. And what was the outcome? Dr. Brenner smiled, just a little. She woke up. She had some motor impairment in her left hand, some difficulty with fine motor skills. But with physical therapy, she recovered most of her function. She got lucky. In your medical opinion, Dr. Brenner, would Sophia's outcome have been different if the ambulance had reached the hospital 8 minutes sooner? Yes, absolutely. Those 8 minutes increased her risk of permanent injury significantly. The fact that she recovered as well as she did is remarkable, but it didn't have to be that close. Daniels thanked him and sat down. Gast didn't cross-examine. There was nothing to gain from questioning a pediatric trauma surgeon about whether 8 minutes mattered. The prosecution rested. It was late afternoon by the time Gast stood up to present his defense. The jury looked tired, so did the gallery, but everyone was paying attention. Gast called his first witness, a traffic safety expert named Dr. Neil Hammond. He had a PhD in civil engineering and had spent 20 years studying traffic patterns, driver behavior, and road design. Gast walked him through his credentials, then asked him to explain the challenges of driving on Laurel Canyon Boulevard. It's a narrow road with limited shoulders, significant elevation changes, and frequent curves. Visibility is often restricted. For a driver unfamiliar with the road, it can be difficult to find a safe place to pull over, especially if there's oncoming traffic. Is it possible that a driver might not feel safe pulling over, even if they're aware of an emergency vehicle behind them? Yes. If the driver perceives that pulling over would create a hazard for themselves or for others, they might choose to continue until they reach a safer location. It was a reasonable argument, in theory. But Daniels tore it apart on cross-examination. Dr. Hammond, have you reviewed the dashcam footage from this incident? Yes. And in that footage, did you observe any oncoming traffic that would have prevented Mrs. Harrington from pulling over? Hammond hesitated. There was some oncoming traffic, yes. Some. Can you quantify that? I counted 3 vehicles over the 2.5 mile stretch, 3 vehicles, and were those vehicles spaced in such a way that there was never a gap in which Mrs. Harrington could have safely pulled over? Well, no. There were gaps. How many gaps did you observe where the shoulder was wide enough and there was no oncoming traffic? Hammond looked uncomfortable. At least 4. At least 4 opportunities to pull over safely. And did Mrs. Harrington take any of those opportunities? No. Thank you, Dr. Hammond. Gast called 2 more witnesses. A friend of Victoria's who testified to her character. A colleague from one of her charity boards who talked about her volunteer work. It didn't matter. The jury wasn't interested in who Victoria Harrington was in other contexts. They were interested in who she was on March 14th, on Laurel Canyon Boulevard, when a 6-year-old girl was dying behind her. And then Gast made a choice that I still don't fully understand. He called Victoria Harrington to the stand. The bailiff swore her in. Victoria Harrington placed her left hand on the Bible, raised her right hand, and said, "I do," in a voice that was clear and unwavering. She smoothed her skirt as she sat down, crossed her ankles, and folded her hands in her lap. She looked composed, practiced, like she'd done this before, though I knew she hadn't. Gast approached the stand. "Mrs. Harrington, thank you for being here today." She nodded, didn't smile, didn't say "you're welcome," just acknowledged him and waited. "Can you tell the court what you do for a living?" "I manage philanthropic initiatives for the Harrington Foundation. We fund educational programs, medical research, and arts programs throughout Southern California." "How long have you been doing this work?" 12 years. And prior to that, I was a consultant for nonprofits. I helped organizations develop sustainable funding models and community outreach strategies. Gast nodded, like this was exactly what he wanted the jury to hear. Victoria Harrington wasn't just a billionaire's wife. She was educated, she was accomplished, she contributed. "Mrs. Harrington, can you describe the events of March 14th? She took a breath. "I had a difficult morning. I'd been dealing with a foundation board meeting that ran over, and I had a personal appointment scheduled for 3:30. I was running late. I got in my car around 3:15 and started driving to Studio City." "What kind of appointment was it?" "A wellness appointment. I'd been dealing with significant stress and my doctor had recommended regular sessions to manage it." Gast nodded sympathetically. "What happened while you were driving?" "I was on Laurel Canyon, heading south. Traffic was moderate. I was in the left lane because I had a turn coming up. At some point I became aware of sirens behind me." "What did you do?" "I looked in my rearview mirror. I saw an ambulance. I also saw that there were other vehicles around me, and I wasn't sure where I could safely pull over. The road is narrow there, and I was concerned about creating a hazard." It was a good answer. Rehearsed but good. "Did you see Officer Ramirez pull up alongside you?" "Yes." "What did you think when you saw him?" "I thought he was trying to get around me, so I stayed in my lane to give him room to pass." Gast paused. "Let that sit. Mrs. Harrington, at any point during this incident did you intend to obstruct the ambulance?" "No, absolutely not." "Did you intend to cause harm to anyone?" "Of course not." "Why didn't you pull over immediately when you first heard the sirens?" "Because I didn't think it was safe. I was looking for a place where I could pull over without causing an accident. And when I reached my destination, I did pull over." Gast nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Harrington." He turned to me. "No further questions, Your Honor." I looked at Daniels. "Cross-examination." She stood up. Didn't rush. Didn't grab a notepad or a file. Just walked slowly to the center of the room and looked at Victoria Harrington. "Mrs. Harrington, you testified that you were concerned about safety. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Whose safety were you concerned about?" Victoria blinked. "I'm sorry, whose safety?" "Yours, the other drivers, the ambulance crew, everyone's." "I didn't want to cause an accident." Daniels nodded. "Understandable. Let me ask you this. When you saw the ambulance in your rearview mirror, did you consider the possibility that someone inside that ambulance might be in a life-threatening situation?" I assumed they were responding to an emergency." "Yes, you assumed. But you didn't know, did you?" "No. So you saw an ambulance with lights and sirens, you assumed there was an emergency, and you decided that your concern about creating a hazard was more important than getting out of the way. Is that accurate? Victoria's jaw tightened. I was trying to make a safe decision. For whom? For everyone involved. Daniels walked to the evidence table and picked up a printed map. She brought it to the stand and placed it in front of Victoria. Mrs. Harrington, this is a map of Laurel Canyon Boulevard between Mulholland Drive and Ventura Boulevard. Do you recognize it? Yes, Daniels pointed to a spot on the map. This is where Officer Ramirez first made contact with you, correct? I suppose so. I don't remember the exact location. This is where you finally pulled over. Approximately 3/4 of a mile later, correct? Yes, Daniels traced the route with her finger. During this 3/4 mile stretch, there are 4 locations where the shoulder widens significantly. Did you see any of those? I don't recall. You don't recall seeing a wider shoulder, not even once. I was focused on the road ahead. You were focused on the road ahead, Daniels repeated. But not on the rearview mirror. I checked my mirrors. How often? I don't know. Regularly. But not regularly enough to notice 4 opportunities to pull over. Gass stood up. Objection. Argumentative. I looked at Daniels. She was pushing, but she hadn't crossed the line. Overruled. The witness may answer. Victoria's voice was clipped. I made the best decision I could in the moment. Daniels picked up a remote and turned on the screen. Let's watch the dashcam footage again. The video played. The same footage we'd seen before. The ambulance. The Range Rover. Officer Ramirez pulling alongside. Daniels paused the video at the moment when Victoria turned her head and looked at the officer. Mrs. Harrington, is that you? Yes. And you're looking directly at Officer Ramirez, correct? Yes. What was he doing? Waving his arm. And what did you think he was signaling? I thought he was trying to get past me. Daniels tilted her head. You thought a police officer on a motorcycle, waving his arm and pointing to the side of the road, was trying to get past you. Yes, not that he was telling you to pull over. I wasn't certain. You weren't certain. So when you saw a police officer gesturing, you decided to ignore him and keep driving. I didn't ignore him. I gave him space to pass. Daniels let the silence stretch. Then she said, Mrs. Harrington, how long have you been driving? Since I was 16. So approximately 26 years. Yes. And in those 26 years, how many times have you encountered an emergency vehicle with lights and sirens? I don't know. Many times. And what did you do in those instances? I pulled over. You pulled over every time? Yes, when it was safe to do so. When it was safe, Daniel said. And on March 14th, you determined that it was never safe to pull over, even though you'd done it many times before in similar circumstances. Victoria didn't answer immediately. I could see her calculating, trying to figure out how to respond without contradicting herself. Finally, she said, this situation felt different. Different how? The road was more crowded. There was more traffic. Daniels walked back to the evidence table and picked up a traffic report. According to the California Highway Patrol, traffic on Laurel Canyon Boulevard on March 14th at 3:20 p.m. was classified as light to moderate. Does that sound crowded to you? I can only speak to what I experienced. What you experienced. Let me ask you this. When you finally pulled into the Serenity Now parking lot, was it because you suddenly felt it was safe to stop? I had reached my destination. That's not what I asked. I asked if you stopped because it was suddenly safe or because you'd arrived where you wanted to go. Victoria's voice went cold. I stopped because I had arrived. So safety wasn't the determining factor. Convenience was. That's not what I said. Then what are you saying, Mrs. Harrington? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you decided that your wellness appointment was more important than getting out of the way of an ambulance. Gass shot up. Objection, the prosecutor is testifying. I sustained it. Miss Daniels rephrase. Daniels didn't break eye contact with Victoria. Mrs. Harrington, what time was your appointment? 3:30. And what time did you pull into the parking lot? I don't recall exactly. According to the dashcam timestamp, it was 3:28. So you were 2 minutes early, correct? If that's what the timestamp says. Were you worried about being late? I don't like to be late, no. You don't like to be late. So when you saw the ambulance behind you and you had a choice between pulling over immediately or continuing to your appointment on time, you chose the appointment. Is that fair to say? No. I chose what I thought was the safest option. Daniels walked closer to the stand. Mrs. Harrington, do you know what was happening in the back of that ambulance while you were driving to your appointment? No, a 6-year-old girl was dying. Her heart had stopped. Paramedics were performing CPR on a child while you were checking your mirrors and deciding it wasn't convenient to pull over. Did you know that? I didn't know what was in the ambulance, but you knew it was an emergency. You knew someone needed help, and you decided your schedule was more important. That is not what I decided. Then what did you decide, Mrs. Harrington? Victoria's composure finally cracked, just a little. Her voice rose slightly. I decided to keep driving until I reached a safe place to stop. That's what I decided. I'm sorry if that wasn't good enough for you, but I did what I thought was right. Daniel stared at her for a long moment. Then she said, you did what you thought was right. Even though every other driver on that road managed to pull over, even though a police officer signaled you to stop, even though you could hear the sirens and see the lights, you decided you knew better than everyone else. Objection? Gast was on his feet. Your Honor, this is harassment. I looked at Daniels. She'd made her point. Miss Daniels, move on. She nodded. Mrs. Harrington, after you pulled into the parking lot and the ambulance drove away, what did you do? I went inside. You went inside. To your appointment. Yes. Did you ask anyone at the spa if they knew what the ambulance was for? No. Did you call the police to see if everything was okay? No. Did you think about it at all? Victoria's eyes narrowed. I assumed the ambulance had handled whatever emergency they were responding to. You assumed. Just like you assumed the police officer was trying to get past you. You make a lot of assumptions, don't you, Mrs. Harrington? Objection. Gast's voice was sharp now. Sustained, I said. Miss Daniels, you're done. Daniels turned away from the stand. No further questions, Your Honor. Victoria sat there, her hands clenched in her lap. Her face was flushed. For the first time since the trial started, she looked rattled. Gast called her back for redirect, tried to let her clarify, tried to soften the damage. But it was too late. The jury had seen what they needed to see. She wasn't a villain. She wasn't evil. She was something worse. She was indifferent. We recessed for the day. The jury went home. The gallery emptied. I went back to my chambers and sat at my desk, staring at the case file in front of me. My clerk, a sharp young woman named Jennifer who'd graduated top of her class from Loyola, knocked on the door. Come in, I said. She stepped inside. How are you holding up? I leaned back in my chair. I've had easier cases. Do you think the jury's going to convict? I don't predict juries, Jennifer, you know that. But if you had to guess, I looked at her. If I had to guess, I'd say they already made up their minds halfway through Daniel's cross-examination. Jennifer nodded. For what it's worth, I think you're handling this well. Gast is trying to make it about character, but you're keeping it focused on the facts. That's the job. She hesitated. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Do you think she feels bad about what she did? I thought about Victoria Harrington sitting on that stand. The way she answered questions. The way she looked at Daniels. No, I said. I don't think she does. I think she feels inconvenienced. I think she feels judged, but I don't think she feels bad. That's kind of terrifying. It is, I agreed, but it's not uncommon. Some people go through their whole lives without ever being held accountable for anything. And when it finally happens, they don't know how to process it. They think the system is broken because it's applying to them. Jennifer left. I sat there for another hour, going through my notes, making sure I hadn't missed anything. Then I went home. Closing arguments happened 2 days later. Daniels went first. She stood in front of the jury and spoke clearly, methodically, without theatrics. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not complicated. On March 14th, Victoria Harrington made a choice. She saw an ambulance. She heard the sirens. She saw a police officer signal her to pull over. and she chose to keep driving, not because it was unsafe to stop, not because she was confused, but because she had somewhere to be and she didn't want to be inconvenienced. That choice had consequences. A 6-year-old girl nearly died. Her mother sat in the back of an ambulance, watching her daughter turn blue, helpless, while the person in front of them refused to move. Mrs. Harrington has had every opportunity to take responsibility for that choice. She hasn't. She's made excuses. She's blamed the road, the traffic, the design of the highway. She's blamed everyone except herself. The law is clear. When you obstruct an emergency vehicle, you are responsible for the harm that obstruction causes. The evidence is clear. The defendant obstructed that ambulance for 2.5 miles, and the harm is clear. Sophia Voss nearly died. Your job is simple. Hold Mrs. Harrington accountable for her choice. She sat down. Gass stood up. He buttoned his jacket, walked to the jury box, and took a breath. Ladies and gentlemen, my client is not a criminal. She's a mother, a philanthropist, a woman who has spent her life trying to help others. On March 14th, she made a decision in a split second, a decision that, in hindsight, she wishes she'd made differently. But this case isn't about hindsight. It's about what a reasonable person would do in the moment, under pressure, with incomplete information. Mrs. Harrington didn't know there was a child in that ambulance. She didn't know the severity of the emergency. She saw an ambulance, she saw traffic, and she made a judgment call. Was it the right call? Maybe not. But does that make her a criminal? No, it makes her human. We all make mistakes. We all have moments where we wish we'd done something differently. But we don't criminalize people for making a decision that seemed reasonable at the time. The prosecution wants you to believe that my client is indifferent, that she doesn't care about human life. That's not true. She cares deeply. But she also cares about safety. And in that moment, she believed the safest thing to do was continue driving until she found a place to pull over. You may disagree with that decision. But disagreement is not the same as guilt. I'm asking you to put yourselves in her shoes, to imagine what it's like to be driving, to hear sirens, to see flashing lights, and to have to make a decision in seconds. And then ask yourselves, does this woman deserve to be convicted of a crime? I don't think she does, and I hope you agree. He sat down. I gave the jury their instructions. I explained the law. I explained the burden of proof. I told them to consider only the evidence presented in the courtroom, to set aside any sympathy or bias, and to reach a verdict based on the facts. Then I sent them to deliberate. They were out for 3 hours. 3 hours is not a long time for a jury to deliberate. It's long enough to elect a foreperson, go through the evidence, take a few votes, and come to a consensus. But it's not long enough to suggest serious disagreement. When the bailiff told me they'd reached a verdict, I wasn't surprised. We reconvened in the courtroom. The gallery filled up again. The press was there, more of them this time. Word had gotten out that a verdict was coming. Elena Voss sat in the front row, same seat she'd occupied every day of the trial. Her hands were folded. Her face was pale. Victoria Harrington sat at the defense table, her posture perfect, her expression neutral. Gast sat beside her, his hand resting on a legal pad. The jury filed in. I watched their faces. None of them looked at Victoria. That's usually a bad sign for the defense. The foreperson, a retired schoolteacher named Margaret Flynn, handed the verdict form to the bailiff. The bailiff brought it to me. I read it, kept my face blank, and handed it back. The defendant will rise, I said. Victoria stood. Gast stood beside her. I nodded to the bailiff. Read the verdict. The bailiff unfolded the paper. In the matter of the People versus Victoria Harrington, on the charge of reckless endangerment, we the jury find the defendant guilty. On the charge of intentional infliction of emotional distress, we the jury find the defendant guilty. On the charge of interference with emergency services, we the jury find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Not loudly. This wasn't a murder trial, but there was a ripple of reaction. Whispers, a few gasps. Someone in the back started clapping and was immediately silenced by the bailiff. Victoria's face went white. She didn't sit. She just stood there staring straight ahead like she couldn't process what she just heard. Gast put a hand on her arm. "Your Honor, we'd like to request." I held up a hand. "Mr. Gast, sentencing will be scheduled in 30 days. Until then, the defendant will remain free on her own recognizance. We're adjourned." I brought the gavel down. Victoria sank into her chair. Gast leaned over, speaking to her in a low voice. She didn't respond. She just sat there, her hands in her lap, staring at the table. Elena Voss burst into tears. Her sister, who'd been sitting beside her every day, wrapped her arms around her. They held each other, crying quietly, while the courtroom emptied around them. I stood and walked back to my chambers. Jennifer was waiting for me. "Guilty on all counts," she said. "Yes. How do you feel?" I set the case file on my desk. "Tired. Do you think she'll appeal?" "Probably. Gast will file every motion he can think of, but the evidence is solid. I don't think it'll go anywhere." Jennifer nodded. "What are you going to give her for sentencing?" I sat down. "I don't know yet. I need to think about it. Daniels is going to push for jail time. I know. And Gast is going to push for probation. I know that too." Jennifer studied me. "You've already decided, haven't you?" I looked at her. "I've been doing this job for 23 years, Jennifer. I've sentenced people who have done far worse things than Victoria Harrington. And I've sentenced people who have done far less. The question I always ask myself is the same. What does justice look like in this specific case for these specific people under these specific circumstances? And what does it look like here?" I leaned back in my chair. "I'll tell you in 30 days. Those 30 days went by faster than I expected. Gast filed a motion for a new trial. I denied it. He filed a motion to set aside the verdict. I denied that too. The day of sentencing arrived. The courtroom was packed. More people than had been there for the verdict. The case had made national news by then. "Billionaire's wife convicted of blocking ambulance" was the headline on every major outlet. Victoria Harrington wore navy blue this time. Her hair was down, softer than it had been during the trial. I don't know if that was a strategic choice or if she just didn't care anymore. Elena Voss was there, front row, same seat. Sophia wasn't with her. I wouldn't have allowed it anyway, too young, too much. Gast stood up first. "Your Honor, I'd like to address the court before you impose sentencing." "Go ahead, Mr. Gast." He took a breath. "Your Honor, my client has no prior criminal record. She spent the last 12 years of her life working to improve her community. She's funded scholarships for underprivileged students. She's supported medical research that has saved lives. She's a mother, a wife, a woman who has contributed more to society than most people ever will. What happened on March 14th was a mistake, a lapse in judgment, but it was not malicious. It was not intentional. And it does not define who she is. I'm asking this court to consider probation and community service, to give my client a chance to make amends without destroying her life." He sat down. Daniel stood up. "Your Honor, the defense wants this court to focus on everything Mrs. Harrington has done except the one thing that matters, what she did on March 14th. She obstructed an ambulance. She ignored a police officer. She put her own convenience above a child's life. And when given the opportunity to show remorse, to take responsibility, she doubled down. She said, and I quote, 'I was handling business, not babysitting ambulances.' That's not a lapse in judgment. That's a character statement. The people of this state deserve to know that there are consequences for that kind of behavior. I'm asking this court to impose jail time. Not because Mrs. Harrington is a danger to society, but because the law means nothing if it only applies to people who can't afford a good lawyer." She sat down. I looked at Victoria Harrington. "Mrs. Harrington, do you have anything you'd like to say before I impose sentencing?" She stood. Her hands were shaking, just slightly, but I noticed. "Your Honor," she said, "I know that nothing I say right now is going to change your mind. I know that you've already decided what you think of me, but I want you to know that I never intended to hurt anyone. I made a choice that day and I stand by it. I believed I was doing the right thing. I'm sorry that it turned out the way it did, but I'm not going to apologize for trying to make a safe decision." She sat down. I let the silence stretch. Then I spoke. "Mrs. Harrington," I began, "you've been found guilty by a jury of your peers on 3 counts: reckless endangerment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and interference with emergency services. Before I impose sentence, I want to make something very clear. This court does not convict people based on who they are. We convict them based on what they did. Your charitable work is admirable. Your contributions to society are noted, but none of that changes what happened on March 14th. I paused, let that settle. You had multiple opportunities to pull over. You chose not to. You saw a police officer signal you to stop. You chose not to. You heard sirens. You saw lights. And you made a calculated decision that your appointment was more important than getting out of the way. That decision nearly cost a child her life. Victoria's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. What troubles me most about this case is not the initial choice you made. People make mistakes. People panic. People misjudge situations. What troubles me is your complete and utter lack of accountability. At every stage of this process, you've had the opportunity to acknowledge that you were wrong. You haven't. Instead, you've made excuses. You've blamed the road. You've blamed the traffic. You've blamed everyone except yourself. I glanced at the jury box, now empty, then back at her. And even now, standing before this court awaiting sentence, you say you stand by your decision. That tells me everything I need to know. It tells me that you believe the rules don't apply to you, that your time, your schedule, your convenience is more valuable than someone else's life. The law exists to correct that belief. And today, I'm going to use the law to do exactly that. Gast shifted in his seat. Victoria remained still. "Mrs. Harrington, you are hereby sentenced to 90 days in county jail. No early release. No work furlough. You will serve the full term. Upon your release, you will complete 500 hours of community service with the Los Angeles County Emergency Medical Services. You will ride along with paramedics. You will see what they see. You will understand what happens when people like you refuse to move." I heard someone in the gallery inhale sharply. "In addition, you will pay a fine of $50,000. That money will be donated to the Voss family to cover medical expenses, therapy costs, and any ongoing treatment Sophia may require. Finally, your driver's license is suspended for 2 years. When you apply for reinstatement, you will be required to retake both the written and practical exams. You will also be required to complete a defensive driving course that includes a module on emergency vehicle protocol." Victoria's mouth opened slightly. It was the first crack in her composure I'd seen since the verdict. Gast stood. "Your Honor, with all due respect, 90 days in custody for a first-time offender on a nonviolent charge is appropriate," I said, cutting him off. "Your client had every opportunity to show this court that she understood the gravity of her actions. She chose not to. The sentence stands." I looked at Victoria one more time. "Mrs. Harrington, I want you to understand something. This sentence is not about punishment. It's about accountability. It's about making sure that you, and anyone else who thinks their time is more valuable than someone else's survival, understand that there are consequences. Real consequences. I hope that when you walk out of that jail in 90 days, you'll have learned something. But whether you do or not, the people of this city will know that the law applies equally, regardless of wealth, regardless of status, regardless of how many scholarships you've funded or how many galas you've attended." I brought the gavel down. "We're adjourned." The bailiff approached Victoria. She stood slowly, like she was moving through water. Gast put a hand on her arm, spoke to her quietly. She didn't respond, just stared straight ahead as the bailiff led her away. Elena Voss collapsed into her sister's arms. They held each other, sobbing, while the courtroom slowly emptied. I stood and walked back to my chambers. Jennifer was waiting as always. 90 days, she said. "Yes, that's more than I expected." "She earned it." Jennifer nodded. "The press is going to have a field day with this. Let them. I didn't make that decision for the press. I made it because it was the right call. Do you think it'll change her?" I set the file down on my desk and looked at Jennifer. "Honestly, I don't know. Some people go to jail and come out worse. Some people go to jail and it breaks something open inside them. I can't predict which one she'll be, but I can make sure she has the opportunity to reflect. And if she doesn't, if she comes out just as entitled as she went in, then at least she'll know that her actions have consequences. And maybe, just maybe, the next time she sees an ambulance, she'll remember the 90 days she spent in a cell and pull over. Jennifer left. I sat down at my desk and stared at the wall. I thought about Sophia Voss, about the fact that she was alive, about the fact that she could have not been. I thought about all the cases I'd heard over the years, the drunk drivers who killed families, the domestic abusers who put their partners in the hospital, the thieves who stole from the elderly. And I thought about Victoria Harrington, who hadn't set out to hurt anyone but whose indifference had nearly killed a child. Sometimes the worst harm doesn't come from malice. It comes from not caring enough to think about anyone but yourself. Victoria Harrington was processed into Los Angeles County Jail 3 days later. I didn't follow the details. Once sentencing is done, the case moves out of my hands, but Jennifer kept me updated. Apparently, the media had camped outside the jail for 2 days straight, waiting for a photo. They got one. Victoria in an orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back, no makeup, walking through a corridor with a corrections officer on either side. The photo ran on every news site in the country. Billionaire's wife behind bars was the headline. I didn't read the articles. I never do after sentencing. It's not my job to manage public opinion. It's my job to apply the law. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about her. I wondered how she was handling it, whether she was angry, whether she was scared, whether she was finally starting to understand. About 2 weeks into her sentence, I got a letter. It came through the court, forwarded to my chambers. The return address was Los Angeles County Jail. I opened it. The handwriting was shaky, not like the confident, looping script I'd seen on court documents during the trial. This was smaller, tighter. Your Honor, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to respond, but I needed to write it anyway. I've been here for 14 days. It feels like longer. I share a cell with a woman named Carmen who's in for check fraud. She talks in her sleep. The food is terrible. The lights never fully go off. I haven't had a moment alone since I got here. I'm not writing to complain. I know I deserve this. I know you think I don't understand that, but I'm starting to. There's a girl in here, 19 years old, who got into a car accident while texting. The other driver died. She cries every night. I listen to her and I think about Sophia Voss. I think about what could have happened if the paramedics hadn't gotten there in time. I think about Alina sitting in that ambulance, watching her daughter die, while I was checking the clock to make sure I wouldn't miss my appointment. I didn't see it before. I see it now. I don't know if that matters to you. It probably doesn't, but I wanted you to know. Victoria Harrington, I read the letter twice. Then I folded it and put it in the case file. I didn't respond. It wasn't appropriate, but I kept it. Because every once in a while, you need to be reminded that people are capable of change, even when you doubt it, even when they've given you no reason to believe it. 90 days later, Victoria Harrington was released. I wasn't there. I didn't attend her release. But Jennifer told me that Gast had picked her up, driven her home, and that she'd avoided the press entirely by leaving through a side exit. 2 weeks after that, she started her community service. I found out because one of the paramedics she was assigned to, a guy named Troy Mendez, happened to be the brother of a court clerk I'd worked with for years. He mentioned it in passing one day when he stopped by to drop off some paperwork. "Your case," he said, "the ambulance lady. She's riding with my brother." I looked up. Yeah, he says she's quiet, doesn't talk much, just watches. Takes notes, asks questions sometimes, but not many. "How's she doing?" Troy shrugged. He says she seems, I don't know, different, like she's actually trying to learn something. Last week they responded to a call. Kid fell off a bike, split his head open. My brother said she went pale when she saw all the blood, but she didn't freak out. Just stayed out of the way and let them work. "Good," I said. "Good, yeah, good," Troy nodded. For what it's worth, my brother says he respects what you did. The sentence, I mean. He thinks it sends the right message. I didn't say anything, just nodded. After he left, I sat there thinking about Victoria Harrington in the back of an ambulance, watching paramedics work, finally seeing what happens when seconds matter. Maybe it would change her, maybe it wouldn't, but at least she was seeing it. 6 months after her release, I got another letter. Same handwriting, same return address, but this time it was a residential address in Colorado. I opened it. Your Honor, I'm writing to let you know that I've moved. My marriage ended 3 months ago. It was a long time coming, but the trial accelerated things. My ex-husband didn't want to be associated with the woman who blocked the ambulance. I don't blame him. I've been working with a nonprofit here in Denver. We train service dogs for children with medical conditions, seizure disorders, diabetes, severe allergies. I started volunteering during my community service hours, and when those hours were done, I kept going. I'm not in charge, I'm not on the board, I just work. I clean kennels, I walk dogs, I help with training sessions. Last week we placed a dog with a 7-year-old girl who has a peanut allergy. The dog is trained to detect trace amounts of peanut protein and alert before she has a reaction. I watched the mother cry when we handed over the leash. She said, "You just gave me my life back." I thought about Elena Voss when she said that. I know this doesn't undo what I did. I know Sophia still has nightmares. I know Elena still pulls over for every ambulance, even when it's not necessary. I know I can't fix that, but I'm trying to be better. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not sure I deserve it, but I wanted you to know that your words stayed with me, all of them. Thank you for holding me accountable. Victoria Harrington. I read the letter 3 times. Then I put it in the file with the first one. I thought about responding, thought about writing back and telling her that accountability isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning. That what she does with the rest of her life matters more than what she did on one day in March. But I didn't, because that wasn't my job. My job was to impose the sentence, to make sure there were consequences. What she did with those consequences was up to her. I ran into Philip Gast about a year later at a legal conference in San Diego. We were both in line for coffee. He saw me first. "Judge Brennan," he said, extending his hand. I shook it. "Mr. Gast, how have you been?" "Busy." "You retired, actually, last year." His eyebrows went up. "Retired? I didn't hear about that. I kept it quiet, didn't want a big thing." He nodded. "I get that." He paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "The Harrington case. Do you ever think about it?" "Sometimes," I said. "Why?" "Because I do, all the time. I've been practicing for 30 years and I've had clients I believed in and clients I didn't. But Victoria," he trailed off, "I knew we were going to lose. I knew it the second she opened her mouth on that stand, but I didn't expect 90 days. I thought you'd go for probation, maybe supervised community service." "I considered it," I said. "What changed your mind?" I thought about how to answer that. Finally, I said, "She didn't give me a reason not to." Every sentence I impose, I ask myself the same question. Has this person shown any indication that they understand what they did wrong? If the answer is yes, I lean toward leniency. If the answer is no, I don't. Gast nodded slowly. "She's different now, you know. I heard, you heard, she wrote me twice. I didn't respond, but I read the letters. She never told me that." He smiled faintly. "She's doing good work in Colorado. I checked in on her a few months ago just to see how she was doing. She's not the same person who walked into your courtroom." "Good," I said. "Do you think the sentence did that, changed her?" I picked up my coffee. "I think the sentence gave her the opportunity to change. What she did with that opportunity was up to her." Gast extended his hand again. "For what it's worth, Judge, I think you made the right call." I shook his hand. "Thank you, counselor." He walked away and I stood there for a moment holding my coffee, thinking about Victoria Harrington, about the woman she was when I sentenced her, and the woman she'd apparently become. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel proud. I just felt relieved. Because the job is hard. You make decisions that affect people's lives and you never really know if you got it right. You never know if the sentence was too harsh or too lenient. You never know if the person walking out of your courtroom is going to learn something or just get angrier. Most of the time, you don't get to find out. But every once in a while, you do. And when you do, it reminds you why you took the job in the first place. I saw Elena Voss one more time, about 2 years after the sentencing. It was at a charity event for children's hospitals. I wasn't running. I'm too old for that, but I donated and they'd asked me to present medals at the finish line. Elena was there with Sophia. The girl was older now, maybe 9 or 10. She had the same dark curls I remembered from the photo, the same bright eyes. Elena saw me and hesitated. For a second I thought she might walk away, but she didn't. She came over, Sophia's hand in hers. "Judge Brennan," she said. "Miss Voss, it's good to see you," she smiled. It was tired but genuine. "This is Sophia." I looked down at the girl. "Hi, Sophia." "Hi," she said. Then shyly, "Are you the judge my mom talks about?" Elena's face flushed. "Sophia," I held up a hand. "It's okay." I looked at Sophia. "I am. Your mom and I met a while ago." Sophia nodded seriously. "She says you're a good person." I felt something tighten in my chest. "That's very kind of her." Elena's eyes were bright. "Can we talk for a minute?" "Of course." She turned to Sophia. "Go get a snack, sweetie. I'll be right there." Sophia ran off toward the snack table. Elena watched her go, then turned back to me. "I never got to thank you properly," she said. "You don't need to." "I do. What you did in that courtroom, what you said, it mattered. Not just the sentence, the words, the way you saw us." "Saw her?" She nodded toward Sophia. "Most people just saw a billionaire's wife who made a mistake. You saw what that mistake cost." "I just did my job, Miss Voss." "Maybe. But not everyone does it the way you did." She paused. "Sophia's doing really well, by the way. The seizures stopped about a year ago. Her motor skills are almost completely back to normal. She plays soccer now. She's even talking about joining the swim team." I smiled. "That's wonderful." "It is. And every time I watch her run across that field, I think about how close we came to losing her. And I think about you making sure that the person responsible was held accountable." She reached out and shook my hand. Her grip was firm. "Thank you, Judge Brennan, for everything." Then she walked over to Sophia, who was already covered in cookie crumbs, and the two of them headed toward the finish line. I stood there for a long time watching them. And I thought about Victoria Harrington, sitting in a jail cell, finally starting to understand. I thought about the letters she'd written, the life she'd built in Colorado. I thought about the choice I'd made that day in the courtroom, the sentence I'd imposed, and I realized something. Justice isn't about making people suffer. It's about making sure that suffering means something, that it leads somewhere, that it creates the space for change. I couldn't force Victoria Harrington to become a better person. I couldn't reach into her chest and rewire her values, but I could make sure that her actions had consequences. And I could make sure that those consequences were significant enough that she couldn't ignore them. That's what I did. And whether she changed because of it, or in spite of it, or for reasons that had nothing to do with me, that wasn't really the point. The point was that I gave her the opportunity. The rest was up to her. 5 years after I retired, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Judge Brennan," the voice was young, female, tentative. "This is he. Who's calling?" "My name is Sophia Voss. I don't know if you remember me." I sat up straighter. "I remember." There was a pause. "I'm 17 now. I'm applying to colleges. My mom said I should call you." "Why's that?" "Because I wanted to tell you something. One of my essays is about what I want to do with my life. I want to be a paramedic." I didn't say anything for a moment. "Couldn't," she continued. "Because of what happened when I was 6, because of the people who saved me, and because of what you did to make sure it mattered." My throat felt tight. "Sophia, the people who saved you, those paramedics, they're the heroes. I just made sure someone was held accountable." "I know, but that mattered too. It mattered to my mom, and it matters to me, so I just wanted to say thank you." We talked for a few more minutes. She told me about the schools she was applying to, about the volunteer work she'd been doing with the local fire department, about the EMT certification program she was planning to start next summer. When we hung up, I sat there staring at the phone. I thought about that day in court, about the fear in Alina's eyes, about the arrogance in Victoria's, about the choice I'd made to impose a sentence that some people thought was too harsh. And I realized that I'd make the same choice again, not because I wanted to punish Victoria Harrington, but because Sophia Voss deserved to grow up in a world where people are held accountable, where consequences exist, where the law protects the vulnerable, not the powerful. That's the world I tried to build, one case at a time, from behind that bench. I don't know if I succeeded, but when I hear a voice like Sophia's, strong, determined, full of purpose, I think maybe I got close. And that's enough. I'm 81 years old now. I've been retired for over a decade. I don't go to the courthouse anymore. I don't keep up with the cases. I don't read the legal journals, but I still remember. I remember every face, every verdict, every moment when the room went silent and everyone waited to see what I would do. The Harrington case isn't the most important case I ever heard. It's not the most complex. It's not the one that set precedent or changed the law, but it's the one people ask me about, at dinners, at reunions, at the grocery store. When someone recognizes me and wants to talk, they always ask the same thing. Do you think she learned her lesson? And I always give the same answer. I don't know, but I made sure she had the chance, because that's all a judge can do. You can't force someone to change. You can't make them feel remorse. You can't reach into their chest and rearrange their values, but you can make sure their actions have consequences. You can make sure the people they hurt are seen, heard, and valued. You can make sure the law means something. And if you do that consistently, fairly, without fear or favor, then maybe, just maybe, the world becomes a little more just. Not perfect, but better. Last month I received a package in the mail. No return address. Just my name and my old Chambers forwarding address, rerouted to my home. Inside was a framed photograph. It showed a woman in her early 50s standing next to a golden retriever wearing a service vest. Behind them was a sign. Mountain Hope Service Dogs Changing Lives, one paw at a time. The woman's hair was longer than I remembered. She was smiling, not the practiced, polished smile I'd seen in the courtroom. A real one. On the back, in handwriting I recognized, were 6 words. Thank you for not giving up. I put the photo on my desk, not because I forgave her, not because I think what she did was okay, but because it reminded me why I did the job in the first place. To listen, to see, to decide, and to make sure that when someone walked out of my courtroom, they knew that their actions, good or bad, mattered. Victoria Harrington mattered. Alina Voss mattered. Sophia mattered. They all mattered. And because I made sure of that, a little girl who almost died in the back of an ambulance is now a young woman preparing to save lives. That's not justice. That's grace. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you get to see the difference. The years passed quietly after that. I settled into retirement the way most people do, slowly, reluctantly, and with the nagging feeling that I should be doing something more. My wife Margaret had passed 2 years before I left the bench. Cancer. It was quick, which I suppose was a mercy, but it left the house feeling too big and too quiet. I filled the time with books, with walks, with the occasional lunch with former colleagues who were still practicing law and liked to complain about the new generation of judges who didn't understand procedure. I listened. I nodded, but I didn't miss it. Well, that's not entirely true. I missed parts of it. I missed the weight of a decision. The feeling that what you said mattered, that it would ripple out into people's lives in ways you couldn't always predict but had to trust were right. I missed the bailiff calling, "All rise," and knowing that for the next few hours I was responsible for making sure the law worked the way it was supposed to. I missed the moments when you could see someone finally understand what they'd done, when the defiance cracked and something real showed through. But I didn't miss the bureaucracy. I didn't miss the politics. And I didn't miss the cases that kept me up at night because there was no good answer, only a least bad one. The Harrington case wasn't one of those. It was clear. It was fair. and I'd handled it the way I thought it needed to be handled, but I still thought about it, more than I expected to. About 7 years after the trial, I got an email. It came through the court's public contact system, which forwards messages to retired judges if they've opted in. I almost never checked it, but that day I did. The subject line read, "A letter of gratitude." I opened it. "Dear Judge Brennan, my name is Carmen Ruiz. You don't know me, but I shared a cell with Victoria Harrington during her sentence at Los Angeles County Jail. I'm writing because I thought you should know what she did for me. I was in for check fraud. I made some bad choices after my husband left, got in over my head, wrote some checks I couldn't cover. It was stupid. I knew it was stupid even while I was doing it. But I didn't know how else to keep my kids fed. Victoria and I didn't talk much at first. She kept to herself. Read a lot. Wrote letters. But one night about 3 weeks in, I was crying. My daughter's birthday was coming up and I wasn't going to be there. Victoria asked me what was wrong. I told her. And she just listened. Didn't judge. Didn't offer advice. Just listened. After that, we talked more. She told me about her case. About the ambulance. About the little girl. She said she'd spent her whole life thinking that if you followed the rules and worked hard, you'd be fine. And she realized, sitting in that cell, that she'd been following the wrong rules. That she'd built a life around status and schedules and appearances, and none of it mattered when a 6-year-old was dying. She said you were the first person who ever held her accountable, really accountable. Not her parents, not her husband, not her friends. You. When she got out, she gave me her contact information. Told me to call her if I needed help getting back on my feet. I thought she was just being nice. But when I got released, I called. And she helped me. She connected me with a financial counselor, helped me find a job, even sent money to cover my first month's rent so I wouldn't go back to my old habits. I've been clean for 6 years now. I have a steady job. My kids are doing well. And I owe a lot of that to Victoria. I know she hurt people. I know what she did was wrong. But I also know that she's trying to make up for it. And I thought you should know that too. Thank you for what you did. For her and for people like me who needed to see that actions have consequences. Sincerely, Carmen Ruiz. I read the email 3 times. Then I closed my laptop and sat on my back porch, staring at the hills. I thought about Victoria Harrington in that cell, listening to Carmen cry, finally understanding what it meant to see someone else's pain. I thought about the woman who'd stood in my courtroom and said she was handling business, not babysitting ambulances. And I thought about the woman who'd apparently spent the last 7 years trying to become someone different. I didn't respond to the email. It didn't seem necessary, but I saved it, because it reminded me of something I'd learned a long time ago. People contain multitudes. They're capable of terrible things and beautiful things, sometimes in the same breath. The job of a judge isn't to decide which version of a person is the real one. It's to make sure that when they do terrible things, there are consequences. And to hope that those consequences create space for the beautiful things to grow. 2 years later, I got a phone call from Elena Voss. I hadn't heard from her since the charity run. When I saw her name on my caller ID, my first thought was that something had happened to Sophia. "Miss Voss," I said, answering quickly. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine, Judge Brennan." Her voice was calm. "I'm sorry to call out of the blue. I wanted to tell you something and I thought you should hear it from me." "Go ahead." She took a breath. "Sophia got into UCLA, full scholarship. She's going to study pre-med with a focus on emergency medicine." I felt something loosen in my chest. "Elena, that's wonderful." "It is. She worked so hard for it, and she wanted me to tell you. She said you were part of the reason she's doing this." "I didn't do anything. She's the one who—" "You held someone accountable," Elena interrupted gently. "You made sure that what happened to her mattered. That it wasn't just something we had to get over and move on from. You gave her justice. And that justice gave her the strength to turn what happened into something meaningful." I didn't know what to say. Elena continued, "There's something else. Victoria Harrington reached out to me about 6 months ago." I sat up straighter. "She did?" "Yes, she sent a letter. It was short, She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't make excuses. She just said she was sorry. That she thought about Sophia every day. That she hoped we were doing well. How did you respond? I didn't. Not at first. I was angry. I thought, who does she think she is, writing to me after all this time? But then I talked to Sophia about it. And Sophia said something that surprised me. What did she say? She said, Mom, if she's sorry, that means what happened to me changed her. And if it changed her, then maybe some good came out of it. Alina's voice wavered slightly. So I wrote back. I told her that I didn't forgive her, that I wasn't ready for that, but I acknowledged that she'd reached out, and I told her I was glad she was doing better. That took courage, I said, maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of being angry. It's been almost a decade, Judge. Sophia's thriving. I'm doing well. Holding on to that anger doesn't serve either of us. We talked for a few more minutes. She told me about Sophia's plans, about her own work. She'd been promoted to senior paralegal and was thinking about going to law school herself. When we hung up, I sat there for a long time, thinking about the invisible threads that connect people across years and miles. Victoria Harrington, Elena Voss, Sophia, Carmen Ruiz, me, all of us bound together by one moment on Laurel Canyon Boulevard, one choice that rippled outward in ways none of us could have predicted. I started writing about my cases after that, not for publication, I'm not that kind of judge, but for myself, to process, to remember. I wrote about the cases that haunted me, the ones where I wasn't sure I'd made the right call, the ones where I knew I had. And I wrote about the Harrington case, not because it was the most important, but because it was the clearest example of what I believe the law should do. It should hold people accountable. It should create space for change. And it should protect the vulnerable from the powerful. That's what I tried to do every day I sat on that bench. I didn't always succeed. I made mistakes. I imposed sentences that were too harsh and sentences that were too lenient. I let my frustration show when I should have stayed neutral. I rushed decisions when I should have taken more time. But I tried. And in the Harrington case, I think I got it right. Not because Victoria Harrington became a saint. She didn't. But because she became someone who understood that her actions had consequences. Someone who looked at the harm she'd caused and decided to spend the rest of her life trying to balance the scales. That's all any of us can do. On the 10th anniversary of the trial, I got a final letter from Victoria Harrington. It came to my home address this time. I don't know how she got it, but I suspect Gast had something to do with it. The envelope was thick. When I opened it, I found a letter and a smaller envelope inside. I read the letter first. Dear Judge Brennan, it's been 10 years since you sentenced me. A decade. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. I don't expect you to remember me. You've probably sentenced hundreds of people since then, and I was just one case among many. But I've never forgotten you. I've never forgotten what you said to me in that courtroom. You told me that the sentence wasn't about punishment, it was about accountability. At the time, I didn't understand the difference. I thought you were just being harsh. I thought you were making an example of me because I had money and because the press was watching. I was wrong. The sentence you gave me was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for me, even though it didn't feel that way at the time. It forced me to stop, to sit in a cell with nothing but time and think about what I'd done, to see people who'd made mistakes like mine, or worse, and realize that I wasn't special, that I wasn't exempt from consequences just because I'd lived a comfortable life. When I got out, I started my community service with the paramedics. I thought it would be humiliating, and it was, but it was also illuminating. I saw what Marcus Chen and his team do every day. I saw how much every second matters. I saw a mother clutching her son's hand in the back of an ambulance while the paramedics fought to keep him breathing. And I thought about Elena Voss, about how that was her, about how I was the reason she had to wait 8 extra minutes while her daughter's heart stopped. I can't undo that. I've accepted that. But I can make sure I spend the rest of my life doing something that matters. I run a nonprofit now. We train service dogs for children with medical conditions. We've placed over 200 dogs in the last 8 years. Every time I hand a leash to a parent and see the relief in their eyes, I think about Alina, about Sophia, about you. I'm not the person I was when I walked into your courtroom. I don't think I'm a saint. I don't think I've earned redemption, but I'm trying. Every day I'm trying. Enclosed is a letter from a mother whose daughter received one of our dogs last year. I thought you might want to read it, not because I need you to forgive me, but because I thought you should know that the decision you made, the sentence you imposed, it mattered. It's still mattering. Thank you, Judge Brennan, for seeing me, for holding me accountable, and for giving me the chance to become someone better. With gratitude and respect, Victoria Harrington. I set the letter down and picked up the smaller envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on pale blue stationery. Dear Mountain Hope Service Dogs, I'm writing to thank you for Max, the diabetes alert dog you placed with our daughter, Lily, 6 months ago. Lily is 8 years old and was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when she was 4. We've been managing it as best we can, but the overnight lows were terrifying. I would wake up every 2 hours to check her blood sugar, and even then I was afraid I'd miss something. Max has changed our lives. He alerts us before Lily's blood sugar drops. He wakes us up in the middle of the night if something's wrong. For the first time in 4 years, I've slept through the night knowing my daughter is safe. I met Victoria when we picked up Max. She told me that she started this work because she wanted to make sure no parent ever had to feel helpless while their child was in danger. She said she knew what that fear looked like, and she wanted to do something about it. I don't know her full story, but I know this. She gave me my peace of mind back. She gave Lily her independence, and for that I will be forever grateful. Thank you for everything you do. Sincerely, Margaret Torres. I read both letters twice. Then I folded them carefully and put them in the file with all the others. I thought about Victoria Harrington, about the journey she'd been on for the past 10 years. From a woman who thought her schedule mattered more than a child's life, to a woman who spent her days making sure children stayed safe. I didn't know if she'd fully forgiven herself. I didn't know if Alina had fully forgiven her. I didn't know if Sophia ever would, but I knew this. She'd taken the consequences I'd imposed and turned them into something meaningful, and that was all I could have asked for. I'm 83 years old now. My health isn't what it used to be. I have good days and bad days. On good days, I walk to the park near my house and sit on a bench and watch people. On bad days, I stay in bed and read and try not to think too hard about how much time I have left. But I don't have regrets, not about the big things anyway. I served on the bench for 24 years. I heard thousands of cases. I made thousands of decisions. Some of them were wrong, I'm sure of it. But I did the best I could with the information I had, and I tried to apply the law fairly, without fear or favor. The Harrington case is still the one people ask me about. Even now, more than a decade later, when I run into former colleagues or old law school friends, someone always brings it up. Whatever happened to that billionaire's wife who blocked the ambulance? And I tell them, not all of it. I keep the letters private, but enough. I tell them she served her sentence, that she did her community service, that she moved to Colorado and started a nonprofit. I tell them that the little girl she nearly killed is in medical school now, studying to become a paramedic. And I tell them that sometimes the system works exactly the way it's supposed to, not because it's perfect, but because it creates space for people to change. Last week I got a visitor. I wasn't expecting anyone. I don't get many visitors these days, so when the doorbell rang I was surprised. I opened the door and there she was, Victoria Harrington. She looked older, of course. We all do. Her hair was streaked with gray. She wore jeans and a simple sweater. No jewelry, no designer labels. She looked normal. Judge Brennan, she said, I hope this isn't intrusive. I was in town for a conference and I wanted to see you. To thank you in person. I stepped aside. Come in. We sat in my living room. I made tea. We didn't talk much at first. Just sat there, two people who'd once been on opposite sides of a courtroom, now just people. Finally, she spoke. I've thought about what I would say to you if I ever had the chance. I've rehearsed it 1,000 times, but now that I'm here, I don't know where to start. Start wherever feels right, I said. She took a breath. I was angry at you for a long time. I thought you were cruel. I thought you didn't understand what it was like to make a split-second decision under pressure. I thought you were punishing me because the media was watching and you wanted to look tough. She paused. But I was wrong. You weren't punishing me. You were holding me accountable, and that's not the same thing. No, I said, it's not. It took me a long time to see that. Years, actually, but I see it now, and I wanted to thank you. Because that sentence, those 90 days, that community service, it saved my life. I looked at her. How so? Because I was drowning, she said simply. I'd built this life that looked perfect from the outside, but inside I was miserable. I was married to a man I didn't love. I was doing work that didn't matter. I was surrounded by people who only cared about me because of my last name. And I didn't even realize it until I was sitting in that cell with nothing but time to think. She wiped her eyes. You gave me the chance to start over, to build a life that actually means something. And I don't think I ever would have done that if you hadn't forced me to stop and look at what I'd become. We talked for over an hour. She told me about her work in Colorado, about the dogs she'd placed, about the families she'd helped, about the life she'd built. And I told her about Sophia, about Elena, about the email from Carmen Ruiz. When she left, she hugged me. It was brief but genuine. Thank you, Judge Brennan, she said, for everything. You did the work, Victoria. I just gave you the opportunity, she smiled. Maybe. But I needed the push. I watched her walk to her car, get in, and drive away. And I thought about all the years that had passed since that day in court, all the lives that had been changed, all the ripples from one decision. I've been thinking a lot about legacy lately. It's something you do when you get to be my age. You start wondering what you'll leave behind, what people will remember. I don't have children. Margaret and I tried, but it didn't happen for us. So I won't leave behind a family that carries my name or my stories, but I will leave behind the decisions I made, the cases I heard, the lives I touched for better or worse. And if I'm remembered at all, I hope it's for this. I tried to be fair. I didn't always succeed. I'm human. I have biases. I have blind spots, but I tried to set them aside when I put on that robe. I tried to listen, to see, to understand. And I tried to make sure that everyone who walked into my courtroom, rich or poor, powerful or powerless, knew that the law applied to them equally. That's what I did in the Harrington case. I didn't give Victoria special treatment because she was wealthy. I didn't come down harder on her because the media was watching. I just looked at what she did, what the law required, and what justice demanded. And I made a decision, one that she hated at the time, one that changed her life, one that I hope made the world a little bit better. Sophia Voss graduated from UCLA 3 months ago. She sent me an invitation to the ceremony. I didn't go. I'm not up for that kind of travel anymore, but I sent her a card. In it I wrote, I'm proud of you, not because of what happened to you, but because of what you chose to do with it. The world needs more people like you. She sent me a photo from her graduation. She was wearing her cap and gown, holding her diploma, standing next to her mother. They were both smiling. On the back of the photo she'd written, "Thank you for making sure my story mattered." I'll carry that with me every day of my career. I put the photo on my desk next to the one from Victoria. Two women, two very different stories, both connected by one moment, one choice, one sentence. And both moving forward, building lives that matter. That's all any of us can do. We can't change the past. We can't undo the harm we've caused or the harm that's been done to us. But we can choose what we do next. We can choose to learn, to grow, to become better. And sometimes, if we're lucky, someone will hold us accountable long enough to give us the space to make that choice. That's what I tried to do, not just in the Harrington case, but in every case I heard. I tried to create space, space for truth, for consequences, for change. And sometimes it worked, not always, but sometimes, and that has to be enough. I'm writing this now because I want there to be a record, not for publication. Not for history books, just a record of what happened, of why I made the choices I made, of what I learned. because someday someone else will sit in that chair, behind that bench, in that courtroom, and they'll face a case like the Harrington case. A case where the facts are clear but the outcome is uncertain. A case where they have to decide between leniency and accountability, between giving someone a break and making sure there are consequences. And I want them to know this. It's okay to be tough. It's okay to impose a sentence that makes people uncomfortable. It's okay to hold someone accountable, even if they're powerful, even if the media is watching, even if people think you're being too harsh. Because accountability isn't cruelty, it's respect. It's saying, I believe you're capable of better, and I'm going to make sure you have the opportunity to prove it. That's what I did with Victoria Harrington. I didn't destroy her life. I didn't send her to prison for years. I didn't make an example of her beyond what the law allowed. I just held her accountable, and I trusted that she was capable of doing something with that accountability. I was right to trust that. Not because she was inherently good, not because she deserved a second chance, but because every human being contains the capacity for change, and the law, when applied correctly, can create the conditions for that change to happen. That's what I believe, that's what I tried to practice, and that's what I hope the next generation of judges will remember. I'm tired now. The writing has taken more out of me than I expected, but I'm glad I did it. Because the Harrington case wasn't just about Victoria Harrington. It wasn't just about Elena Voss or Sophia or Carmen Ruiz. It was about all of us, about the choices we make, the consequences we face, the opportunities we're given to become better. Victoria Harrington made a terrible choice. She blocked an ambulance. She nearly killed a child. But she also made another choice, years later, to take the consequences she'd been given and turn them into something meaningful. That second choice doesn't erase the first one, but it matters. It matters to the families who have received service dogs. It matters to Carmen Ruiz. It matters to the people whose lives Victoria has touched in the years since she walked out of that jail cell. And it matters to me, because it reminds me that the work I did, the sentences I imposed, the decisions I made, they weren't just punishments. They were opportunities. Opportunities for change, for growth, for redemption. Not everyone took those opportunities. Some people left my courtroom and went right back to the same destructive patterns, but some didn't. Some, like Victoria, took the consequences they'd been given and built something better. And that's why I did the job, not for the power, not for the prestige, not even for the salary, but for the moments when I could look at someone and say, you made a mistake, a serious one, and there will be consequences. But those consequences are not the end of your story. They're the beginning of a new chapter. What you do with that chapter is up to you. That's what I said to Victoria Harrington, even if I didn't use those exact words. And that's what I've said in one form or another to every person I ever sentenced. Your actions have consequences, but those consequences don't define you. What you do next, that defines you. It's late now. The sun has set. The house is quiet. I'm sitting at my desk looking at the photos. Victoria with her service dog. Sophia in her graduation cap and gown. Two lives, forever connected by one moment on Laurel Canyon Boulevard. One moment that could have ended in tragedy, but didn't. Because Marcus Chen was a skilled paramedic, because the trauma team at County General knew what they were doing, because Sophia was strong, because Elena was there holding her hand, refusing to let go, and because, years later, I made sure there were consequences. I didn't save Sophia's life. The paramedics did that, but I made sure that what happened to her mattered, that it wasn't just a story people told at dinner parties, that it wasn't just a headline that got clicks for a few days and then disappeared. I made sure it meant something. And in doing that, I gave Victoria Harrington the opportunity to make it mean something too. That's the best any of us can do. We can't control what happens to us. We can't always prevent harm. We can't turn back time. But we can make sure that when harm happens, it's acknowledged, that it's taken seriously, that there are consequences. And we can trust that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, those consequences will lead to something better. That's what happened here. And I'm grateful I got to be a part of it. I was handling business, not babysitting ambulances. Those words will stay with me for the rest of my life, not because they were cruel, not because they were shocking, but because they were honest. In that moment, on that witness stand, Victoria Harrington told the truth about who she was, about what she valued, about how she saw the world. And the truth was ugly. It was a truth that said some people matter more than others, that some schedules are more important than some lives. That inconvenience is worse than indifference. But here's the thing about truth: it can change. The truth of who Victoria Harrington was on March 14th, when she refused to move for that ambulance, is not the same as the truth of who she is today. She's not a different person. She's the same person who made a different choice, a choice to listen, to learn, to grow. And that choice started in a courtroom with a sentence that forced her to stop and think about what she'd done. I'm proud of that. Not because I'm proud of myself, but because I'm proud of the system. The system worked. It held someone accountable. It protected the vulnerable. It created space for change. And in the end, that's all we can ask of it. Because the law isn't perfect. It's not magic. It can't fix everything. But when it's applied fairly, when it's wielded with wisdom and restraint, it can do something remarkable. It can show people who they are and give them the chance to become who they want to be. That's what I tried to do every day I wore that robe. And in the Harrington case, I think I succeeded. Not because Victoria Harrington became perfect, but because she became accountable. And from accountability came everything else: the letters, the nonprofit, the dogs, the families, the second chances. All of it started with consequences, with a judge who looked at a woman in a cream-colored suit and said, "Your actions matter, and so do the people you hurt." That's the job. That's always been the job, and I'm honored I got to do it. I'm closing this file now, putting it away with all the others, the cases I won, the cases I lost, the cases that still haunt me, and the cases that give me hope. The Harrington case will always be one of the latter, because it reminds me that people can change, that justice isn't about revenge, it's about accountability, and that sometimes the hardest thing you can do for someone is hold them responsible, not because you want to hurt them, but because you believe they're capable of better. I believed that about Victoria Harrington, and she proved me right. Not immediately, not easily, but eventually, and that's enough. It's more than enough, it's everything.